Good morning. You are watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Kwagala, your host. Today, we center our discussion on the twin component of the Parliament's mandate, namely the appropriation and the oversight function of Parliament, by reviewing the recent developments in the August House, including the release of the capitation grants to schools across the country and the discussion surrounding the borrowing record amid concerns of the ballooning public debt. Viewers, you are most welcome to this program. It is now my pleasure and honor to introduce to you my distinguished guests who are with me in studio to help us to discuss today's topic. Let me start with my immediate left is Mr. Timothy Chemonges, the Associate Director for the Parliament Watch and the Center for Policy Analysis. You're most welcome. Dogu, say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, Isaac, and a good morning to our viewers. Glad to be with the panelist colleagues here and looking forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Next to Timothy is Professor Mwambutsya Ndebesa, a professor of history and a renowned political commentator. Professor, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you. Good morning, the viewers, and I am glad to have you as my audience today, and we share these issues of national importance. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Professor. And of course, a regular who is being quite lost, but we're glad she's back, Winfred Mugambwa, the Executive Director for Right for Her, a civil society organization focused on women empowerment. Winfred, you're most welcome. Glad to have you. Say hello to the viewers.
Good morning, viewers. Happy to be here. I'm happy that there is inclusion here. And I know it's going to be fruitful. And I'm happy that I'm humbled that you're involving us and accepting my views to be heard here. Thank you to Civic Space TV.
Many thanks indeed. And of course, last but not least is our watchdog, our public watchdog, a representative of the media, a practicing journalist, and the General Secretary for the Uganda Parliamentary Press Association, Mr. Apollo Tusiime. Apollo, you're most welcome to the program. Say hello to the viewers.
Thank you, Isaac, and good morning, our viewers. I'm pleased to be part of the Civic Space. I am looking forward to a fruitful engagement this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Apollo, for joining us. Timothy, I'm going to engage you to kickstart us on the discussion surrounding the release of the capitation grants to the various schools in the country. Now, this is a subject that is causing a lot of rancor, especially from the public, in a sense that the government has failed thus far, despite its efforts to roll out what it calls public education, to increase the threshold that is being budgeted per student, which today stands at just a paltry 3,000 per term. There has been a lot of concern, especially from the lawmakers, in particular Honorable Sewungu, who has said that the delay, notwithstanding the insignificance of the amount, but even the delay to release that money to the schools is hampering the delivery of education in the country. What is it that can really be done to address this challenge?
Thank you, Isaac. Maybe I should start with giving a perspective of what capitation grants are. So these are funds usually released by government specifically to public schools, mostly primary and secondary schools, to facilitate the minimal expenditures within the institution, to facilitate expenditures such as electricity, water, buying chalks, and all the other minimal expenditures that institutions incur in a day-to-day running of the schools. That also includes managing the hygiene of the institution. And so what that means is that this is an enabling and a core money that schools use in the running of the day in, day out, and it greatly contributes to the performance of how these institutions run. Two, I should also mention that the factor for the current challenges that the schools are facing in terms of releases for the capitation grant, at least from the government perspective, it's been indicated it's partly due to the verification process that government is undertaking. And that arises from the Auditor General's report, where some of the challenges that were highlighted is that you have schools over-reporting the number of students in order to get an advantage, fair, or get a bit of excess resource. And so it is true, and it's also it's necessary to ensure that the resources being released are in line with the number of students. Three is to also emphasize that as it stands now, in principle, it was agreed that the capitation grant, which stands at 3,000, should be released at least 15 days to the schools resuming, partly to ensure that the schools are able to have resource to manage all those challenges or the things that needs to be done. As it stands now, definitely there is a bigger problem that goes beyond the capitation grant within the education sector. And the core of it is our attitude, our approach towards education in this country. The only...
as a people or as a government?
No, I mean as a people. The people form the government, and sometimes you being able to demand for better. But as it stands now, definitely there are challenges in how the government views education. Education is the only common denominator, and it's the equalizer in a society. And if government does not prioritize education, that also compromises the quality of its citizens in future. And so I think that there are definite concerns in terms of the quality of education, and capitation grant is just one of those things. But because today our focus is largely around capitation grant, I will say the following, that the amount of money that government is disbursing to these institutions is very minimal. That's partly to the number of the students that are there, but also looking at the challenges that some of these schools are grappling with, and they need to be addressed. Going that extent into the welfare of the teachers, but also more importantly in how schools are able to be managed. The other and most important is as far as how government deals with planning. Again, if government is undertaking verification of the students and some of those numbers, that has to be done in a manner that does not compromise the running of the schools. It goes against logic. If schools have resumed and you're still undertaking verifications and schools cannot receive these resources, what that means is that learning is going to be affected. And once that is at place, it only means that the whole issues to do with education is affected. But also it's good to emphasize that and also mention that some schools that have already been verified have already received those money. In fact, I think I saw the report by the minister was indicating that out of 173 schools that were supposed to be verified, at least 153 had been already verified and resources had been disbursed. And so definitely it's true that there is a bit of work in progress from the government side, but we have a bigger challenge, in terms of how education, how we view management of this sector properly. Yeah.
Professor, let me come to you. You are an academic of high repute, and naturally I would imagine that you have a very deep interest in the education sector of the country. There has been a perennial concern surrounding the inadequate monies that the government is allocating in terms of the capitation grants to manage the education sector. Are you satisfied with the efforts of government to promote sound education, sound and equitable education in the country?
Thank you for that question, but if you don't mind, I will digress a bit and expound and expand on this issue of schools, managing the schools and financing schools or financing education.
Please.
I think we should also bring in the perspective of democracy, and some elements of democracy are participation and equality. And therefore, education is very critical for very many reasons. It is also an enabler, as somebody has pointed out, in terms of social mobility. And by the way, in Uganda now, social mobility is almost disappearing because there are certain sections of society who can afford fees and who can afford good schools and quality education, and those who cannot. But in terms of management and these fees and all that, we want to look at participation. I think during the colonial period, even when Western education was pioneered in Uganda by the missionaries, and I think it was somehow on a sound foundation, that education, to a certain extent, the schools used to get grants in aid, although I think the missionaries were more or less running those schools, but they would get grants. But the issue is also having a joint management, joint administration, joint governance of schools. Incidentally, even during Idi Amin's bad regime, why somehow education was maintained was because I think of participation by the PTA, Parents Teachers Association. So, and under the NRM, and especially with the attitude of Museveni, the president, he has been wanting to look at education, I think, as a monopoly of the central government, not decentralizing in terms of administration and ideas. So, this capitation grant, which my colleague here explained very well, it is just the grants governments give minus salaries. First of all, we have already pointed out that it's not enough. Sometimes it delays, and these verification exercises have taken place. There have been head counts, there have been this and that. They come to nothing. Again, we go back to the cycle. So, I think when we broaden it, we look at the question of, for example, paying science teachers far better than the arts teachers, paying those science teachers only in secondary and not in primary, I think have raised some concerns in this country, and yet those are fundamental policy shifts. And according to the Cabinet Secretariat, which is in charge of policy making in Uganda, I hope the viewers and the colleagues here know that the holding house for all policies in Uganda is the Cabinet Secretariat Office.
That's true.
And the Cabinet Secretariat Office has got principal guidelines for making policy in this country. The guidelines sometimes are low. The guidelines are that no policy should pass through, should be implemented without public participation. But it seems some of these policies are done without public participation. And that's why some members of the public are complaining. I hope most of you and the viewers have seen the church, especially the Anglican church, wanting to get back at their founded schools. The church founded schools, and for them they start asking for more fees, and so the government just gives in. So the Anglican church is not happy. I suspect even the Catholic church is not happy. I think some parents are not happy. Administrators at the school level, the headmasters and the teachers are not happy. Why? What is the indicator? The president has emphasized year in, year out on public rallies everywhere that there should not be fees charged, but fees continue to be charged. that schools are overcharging, they should reduce, they have continued actually increasing. That means the policies of government to schools in terms of management have no roots in society. In other words, there has not been a participation. And we need participation. Because, I mean, who came up with did you say 3,000?
Yes.
Per term? What is 3,000? You can't get out here and get even a meal. 1 meal of one, not one day, but one time like lunch of 3,000. How do you send that one to school to do everything? The vehicles, the fuel, the grass cutting, the toilets, the buildings, the whatever, 3,000 per term, per child. You see, it is very little. Was it discussed with the parents or PTAs or representatives of the parents? Because the parents are big stakeholders in education. And so are the churches and mosques in Uganda, because most of these schools have got that religious foundation. Have they been discussed? But even Parliament, I have listened to Parliament even yesterday when the issue of the report of education came out. Even most members of Parliament, nearly all, are distancing themselves from policies of government in education. Did you listen? Yeah, I listened. So now, how do we have a policy that is not owned by the people? When policies are not owned by the people, these NGO people will tell you that there is need for policy ownership if it has to be legitimate and therefore easy to implement. Otherwise, if there is no ownership, there won't be accountability, there won't be acceptability, there won't be legitimacy, and the policies will not be easy to implement. So in Uganda, part of the reasons, you know, in Uganda, policy implementation is very, 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 very poor. There is a common saying in the general public here, in the public narrative, that good policies are made in Uganda, they are tried in Kenya, and implemented in Rwanda. Why? The good policies we are talking about, they are just good in writing, but they are not good in participation. Or if there is participation, people are participating. They are just brought in at validation level. So, to conclude for now, I think that these policies of government to schools in terms of management, in terms of funding, in terms of amounts, in terms of all this, the government needs to rethink its procedures of policies in schools. You don't just stand there when we were beginning UPE, which I think was a good policy, but again not thought through very much. The permanent secretary then, I've forgotten his name, of Ministry of Education, made a statement about UPE, and the president told him to keep off. So he told the PS education, that's the chief, almost implementer, keep off my UPE. Now if you tell the chief supervisor of education to keep off, then who is going to run it? Because the president is a political head somewhere supposed to supervise or give direction. But you are telling the chief implementer of UPE to keep off. I suspect that statement was hidden too. Most of those people have kept off. They have to survive, of course. They are getting their salary, but they keep off. They continue saying, 3,000 is okay. The government has said 3,000, and they continue with 3,000. Science teachers are paid, I don't know whether it is 5 times or 10 times or whatever times than the arts teachers. You just keep quiet. Yesterday I heard in the debate people saying that even science teachers are not happy. I heard the head of the leader of the Science Teachers Association saying that you see education to survive, and I think it was a correct diagnosis, it's not a matter of the teacher only. It is teachers, it is administrators, it is other sectors of education that makes education succeed. But if you say, keep off, then you end up having a song every day. I sometimes sympathize with the president. He every day sings that, don't charge, they charge. I am going to dismiss whoever charge, they charge.
They increase, actually.
They actually increase. Not increase, they increase. Now, if a policy is not owned by the stakeholders in a participatory manner, not being participated, the implementation is going to be very hard, and those are the consequences we are reaping. Lack of stakeholder participation in policy, in educational policy shifts in Uganda.
Winfred, Professor points out as a core problem the lack of public, general stakeholder participation in the education policy direction of the education sector in the country. In your assessment, what do you consider to be the problem, the stumbling block that is impeding progress in the education sector?
Thank you so much. I will add on what everyone has said because they are all correct. We are witnessing a good initiative, a good project in the wrong hands. When you look at and you read the aim, the goal of the UPE and USA, it is a good initiative. It is really a good initiative for our country because it would give it gave access to the many non easy to reach communities, and it also gave access to many unprivileged students, and
including myself.
You know, so it is a good initiative, but in wrong hands. And it is how it's designed, and I think there is need of redesigning and looking at it. It is more focused on access and enrollment, rather than quality and retention and sustainability. When we are talking about education, we are looking at one of the things Uganda ratified to, that is the SDG, and they're also aiming at achieving the SDGs, the 17 SDGs. And when we are talking about education, we are now focusing SDG 4, which looks at quality education for sustainability. But we are talking about, where is the quality? Yes, we are seeing the quantity of numbers enrolled. That is why they are looking at focusing. Let's focus on how many students or pupils are being enrolled. They're not focusing on quality. Yes. Have we ever since, because UPE started in, is it 1997? It was 97, and USE started in 2006. But have we ever had a report around retention? I don't know that you've written any report around retention there, or even the government releasing any report around retention, or even the Ministry of Education releasing any report around retention. They're always talking about, we have made education accessible. There is where they wrote about how many numbers increased. Was it around 2000 where they wrote, a Minister of Education wrote about numbers increasing from 3 million, that is primary, to 8 million. Then there is, I've forgotten the year when they wrote about how USE numbers increased. I've forgotten the number. But there is a report where which writes about access, increase in access, increase in enrollment. But you can't only be talking about, which means the aim is about seeing people enter. But what is inside the house, if this education, we are putting it as a house, even if there are violations there. Because when we talk about the money you're talking about, these are issues of under or misallocation of resources. The government is under allocating and misallocating resources around education. Because if you give 3,000, yes, what is it going to do? What is it really going to do? These are people who have also passed through education. The president, I believe the president passed through education himself. The wife who is the Minister for Education passed through education. They have children who have passed through education before even when UPE came into play. You know, so there is experience. They have an experience of what really education means, what really quality education. They always think that we have brought quality education. We are working on SDG 14, and we are towards there. We are doing this. They already have what to learn from. They might have started Because when you look at the story of either their children and grandchildren, where they go to school, I don't want to say that, okay, that is what UPE or USE has to look like. But I must say that that is what it has to look like. Because this is an initiative they brought to the country they think is good. They must be loving what they love for their children, their grandchildren, is what they love for their country. So what I believe they would have borrowed from what they are putting out. If they can take their children and grandchildren to a certain school, even when the country can't afford, in the budget it can't afford, can the picture look like that and we don't have the 3,000? Is it 3,000 per term?
Yes, per student.
Yeah, per pupil. And then yearly it's around, by the way, they are reporting, they always report in a yearly form. 10,
something like 20,000.
No, yeah, it is not 20,000, it is 10,000 to 20,000. So how you get to qualify to get the 20,000?
That is spread across the 3 terms. Yes.
But again, remember, it is 10.
It was 20,000.
20,000 is not the minimum. It is between 10,000 and 20,000 yearly. Who determines who gets the 20,000? Yes. So there is a lot. There is a lot of. To me, if I say that, when you ask me where the problem is, the problem starts from the beginning. Yes. How in Uganda, what I've seen, we get wherever the Ministry of Education went and loved this initiative from, or whether she dreamt about it and loved it and brought it on board, there is always that, like adding on what Professor said, involvement of other stakeholders is lacking in the country. Yes. And also, again, implementing initiatives that have not yet well been built. Yes, because when you don't involve stakeholders, it means that is going to be a half-baked initiative. Because you're coming off. Yes. You
say don't pay, they pay.
But again, you're telling people don't pay. Yes, and you're also not giving in money. So what are you trying to preach? It is you're telling them, please pay indirectly. If you don't provide all the necessary, if the government is not providing all the necessary resources for education, they are indirectly telling parents, please you pay. That is what they are fueling whatever they are saying, because you can't say that you're giving in 3,000 in a school where they have also to cater for administration costs, their infrastructures needed. There are very many different expenses at school. Even in school, there are, so, and you think 3,000 is enough?
Actually, colleague, let me add for you. Most schools, public schools in Uganda, do not have enough teachers. So the parents contribute to pay for non-government sent teachers. They say those are not on payroll. Haven't you heard? You have teachers who are on payroll and teachers who are on,
especially the secondary school,
payroll for the parents.
For the parents, yes.
Now we're on the same page. That is it. So the president singing, because now that is a song. Please don't pay. Please, we will put those in prison who are breaching the UPE. He's contradicting himself. Yes. There is a lot of issues in the education sector until either all the parties concerned, the Minister of Education, even the Parliament, until they all stand up and start speaking truth to power, until all of us we start singing the song that, please, this is not enough money for education. Given that none of them, I want one day now someone to stand up and say that this person's child is in UPE. I mean, it's our member of Parliament. But because they know that for us we are earning money, taxpayers' money, and we are using the taxpayers' money to benefit our children are going in good schools, they are not having the country at heart. We are having leaders who are not having the citizen at heart. We are having leaders who are speaking from privilege. Because they are privileged, And that is the problem. Most people who are speaking for the underprivileged persons are people of privilege. So they are using their lenses. You can't tell me that you're using and comfortable in your lenses of privilege and you will speak well, and you're not allowing the people who are unprivileged to be inclusive in discussions, to have a say in implementation, to have a say or contribute to policies. And you tell me that we'll have better solutions. We are having stagnant and wrong solutions because of the people who are in the room. That is why for me always when I speak, I tell people that ecofeminism is the solution for our country because it speaks to imbalance in power, imbalance in resource allocation. It's because that is all power. People, students, pupils, unprivileged persons are suffering now because of the imbalances in power. They are suffering now because people are fronting exploitation. Yes, people are into, okay, let's exploit. Who can we exploit? So around education, who are the people benefiting from UPE and USE? Are the underprivileged? Are the poor? Are the marginalized communities? Are those less to access communities? So is it easy to exploit that group? Yes, it is easy to exploit. Let's go ahead. Yes, let's go ahead and exploit them. That is why you see that even now, Parliament can accept to release that money. For what? It should have been Parliament to even first, even if on the floor of Parliament. So we are not signing this. We are not accepting this because this is wrong. In the first place, 3,000 is wrong. So the problem we are having are the people seated in those spaces, the privileged person. I'll underline the word privileged. Our problem are the privileged persons speaking for the unprivileged and underprivileged persons in Uganda.
Apollo, let me come to you to pick your perspective. According to the Constitution, education is a public good and the government has a duty to provide basic elementary education to the citizens. However, on the flip side, in terms of the budgetary allocations, you realize that education is among the least funded sectors in terms of the economy, in terms of the general service delivery spectrum. So, as a public watchdog in Parliament, I imagine you are privy to some of these discussions. Why is it that the government is not willing to allocate sufficient funds to a critical sector like education?
Thank you so much, Isaac, and I appreciate the panelists. They raised really pertinent matters relating to such a sensitive sector like education. And I passionately speak about education relating to what Timothy talked about. It counterbalances needs of societies, whether you come from a privileged background or unprivileged background. It is education that can bring that balance. But unfortunately, it is not what we see now, because education now has become a privilege of those who are rich. It's expensive, and I am one of those people who think it was a mistake, a fundamental mistake, to have the education sector liberalized in the 90s when some of the sectors were let to be run by the private sector. Among the private sector. So you ask, why is the education sector not being given what it deserves? And I want to agree with Professor Ndebesa that one of the problems is because most of these policies lack that participation of stakeholders across the board. And I also want to agree with the Honorable Winnie's submission that indeed we have a challenge of policymakers who are standing in a privileged position, determining the fate of the unprivileged. If you critically look at who is benefiting from this situation, where only 3,000 shillings is given out to support a child all through the term, you find out that it is those who own schools in the private sector who are actually benefiting, because the belief in the population now is that if you want quality education, you must take your child to a private school.
These days, even it is international.
And who owns these private schools? You have to also critically look at that. Who owns these private schools? We have members of parliament now that the education sector has become lucrative. They own schools. Most of them are now own schools, private schools.
The Minister of Education has a string of schools.
Oh yeah. Yes, the Minister of Education, of Higher Education, the State Minister of Higher Education has a string of private schools.
So there is a manifest conflict of interest.
Exactly. That is the conflict of interest. So when even the issue comes to, for instance, Parliament, you will not see that enthusiasm you would expect in members of Parliament who would be legislating on behalf of their voters. You will not see it, because they are also beneficiaries of what? Of this crooked system.
Yesterday, actually, one member of Parliament put it on the floor of Parliament that most of us here own schools.
They own schools.
And therefore, we have a conflict of interest.
Yes.
True.
So, it's a big problem. It's also it also goes or explains the capitalistic parasitism that is in our people, who want to exploit every opportunity, even when they know that it hurts many. So it is a big problem, and Professor Ndebesa also talked about when the issue came to Parliament the other day, and members of Parliament were not so even moving to assert themselves over the issue. Yes, they also know that it does not yield anything. They know it at the back of their mind that even if you also push, some of those who even would want to see things change, like he said,
Keep off.
they keep off, because they know that, like he said, the power lies somewhere. The power to change policy lies somewhere. It does not lie with the members of Parliament. They know that a policy, even if it is going to hurt the people, it's not pro-people, when it has the support of the authority somewhere, it will find a way through Parliament. It will. So I want to agree with Winnie and the panelists that this has become a song. It has become a song. Increase capitation grant. Increase capitation grant. Do not increase the school fees, but they increase. Those who increase school fees, they will face these consequences. But they could. So it is really it is really hurting. We can only speak. We can continue demanding for better, but I don't want to even think that it could be deliberate. It could be deliberate to have some people access the right to education, which is actually enshrined in our laws and international laws, that education is a right, to access this right.
And the right to quality education.
Yes, quality education.
Not
while
every
others
education
will remain slaves. It could be. Thank you.
Thank you, Apollo, for your perspective. Focus on Parliament now takes a short break. Do stay with us. We'll see you back shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. You're watching Focus on Parliament on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we evaluate the government's borrowing record amid concerns of a ballooning public debt. Timothy, I am going to engage you first on this one. In this week, we've seen a proposal by the government to borrow up to a tune of 15 million US dollars from the African Development Bank and another separate request of $73 million from the African Development Fund for an additional financing for the construction of the Roropi Moyo and Ajo Katuna Moko Kamuganguzi Road. I suppose this is in Kabale. So the question is, the public is not convinced that in as much as the government consistently justifies these loan requests as aimed at improving public delivery, the public is rather skeptical that there is no real value for money. And they feel that ultimately it is them to bear this burden to pay back these loans. Do you think that the government's record on public borrowing is one that can steer economic development for the country?
Thank you, Isaac. I think I should start again from the perspective that in light of the statistics and the proposal that you mentioned, at the start of every budgeting period or at the point when budget is passed, you have the expenditure and you have the revenue side. And debt is one of the areas for financing the budget. And so right from the start, the government puts a very clear structure in how it intends to finance the budget. In this financial year that we are in, 2024-25, we had actually anticipated that we would borrow up to 8.9 trillion of our total budget. The rest would come from domestic borrowing, domestically getting revenue, mobilizing locally, and then there would be other sources of income. And so debt is one of the areas. Two is to emphasize that from an economic point of view, debt is not a big issue. Borrowing, getting debt, it is how that money is used that actually brings a big problem. Because definitely, even in the big economies, countries which are big economies, they also, depend on debt to boost their economies, but also to inject in the different areas. As we stand today, there is no clear direction actually how much money as a country we owe in debt. The Auditor General's report of 2023, the year ending 2023, actually indicates that our total debt was around 97.3 trillion. Now, Ministry of Finance on the other side actually indicates that our debt is around 93 trillion, which is a divergence of almost 4 trillion. Now, while that, of course, there is a bit of an issue in terms of confusing how much as a country do we owe, there is a bigger issue in terms of sustainability these loans. We see that out of this, and I choose to use the figures from the Auditor General report, indicating that you have almost 46% from domestic borrowing, and then the other is largely from the external. So we have a bigger challenge in terms of how these resources can actually be financed, and it goes to affect how we budget as a country, because if you have close to 40% or thereabout of your budget going to finance debt, it only means that your available discretionary budget is greatly affected, and that means questions to do with service delivery. That's what to do with what Professor greatly champions, national cohesion, and other things really are greatly affected. In fact, as we stand today, if you are to truly look at the amounts of money that government has at its discretion towards development, is so minimal, partly because of the obligations that government has. You have debt, you have wages, you have obligations such as gratuity, and all the other obligations that government has to ensure that it executes. We stand close up to around 30% of our wages. So there is a big challenge in terms of amount of money that goes towards development. In fact, looking at the fact that almost 10% of our budget goes to local governments, actually 95%, between 90 and 95% of that allocation actually goes into wages. So that means, to the extent that we've not managed our debt, it will greatly affect the service delivery, and that compromises, how the country runs. Not to look into the questions of corruption, where you have a debt problem, and then you have a fundamental challenge as a country in terms of how you manage those resources. And the IGG in the last report, you saw them highlighting that up to 10 trillion is lost
every financial year towards corruption.
No, that was for that financial year. Oh. Every year has its own picture for that financial year. In fact, if you look at the statistics during the COVID period of the auditor of the IGG, Inspector of Government, the amounts were so weird that actually they seem not to be true. And so there's a bigger question in terms of how our picture in terms of our finances looks like. But going back to the question of debt, we still have a broader discussion to have, partly because of how these resources have been used in the past. Most of these resources have gone towards to infrastructure, and we see that the turnover, the period of time to recoup these resources, it's a long-term strategy. And so you find that the debt is not injected in areas that you can recoup in the short term. And it only means that to the extent that we are continuing to borrow, it overwhelms the country. IMF suggests that every country should strive to get to around 50% of the debt to GDP ratio. Yeah. As we stand today, at least that's according to the Auditor General's report, we are at around 53%, which is slightly. Of course, finance is trying to play a bit very safer ground, and if it tells you that we are at 93, that means it puts our debt to GDP ratio at around 46%. Of course,
let me be educated, colleague. Does that percentage they are talking about of 53 include domestic debt?
It's a total. In fact,
so that when a school has a debt of firewood supply, it is included in that figure.
No, so this is of course to the extent that all debt that government has approved through Parliament.
What about those which are not approved? It's a lot.
I think those
have debts, hospitals have debts, local governments have debts.
As public entities?
A school is public schools. I'm not talking about private.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, so again, but I think also there has to be a bit of clarity in terms of the question of what qualifies to
I
be
think
public
that
debt.
explains the divergent conclusions.
Not really. I think Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Ministry and the Auditor General and Bank of Uganda, they use the same parameter in determining public debt.
And we're talking about public debt as acquired by government, like that one approved by Parliament or something like that.
Yes.
But there is a lot of public debt that is not reflected in those figures.
Yeah, I think to the extent that it doesn't fall within the definition of public debt. Yeah, and so I think that as we stand today, there are definite challenges and issues around how we've managed the debt question. We also have a problem in terms of uptake of some of these loans that we borrow. You find that say Ministry of Agriculture proposes to get a loan with no clear structure of how it's going to spend. So you have up to, actually I was looking at the report, up to around 30% of our debt is still redundant. They have not been, and yet you have interest accruing as soon as you get the unutilized loans. I was looking at the Auditor General's report. He highlights that our interest repayment as of the last financial year stood at around 9.4 trillion, which is a huge amount of money. Even you have not, you've not started dealing with the question of principal, the principal, and I think there's a bigger problem in terms of debt as it stands now. Ministry of Finance, again, which is our principal institution in the country to deal with this kind of discussion, has given us some sort of confidence and saying our debt is manageable and is sustainable. However, when you look at it a bit closely and just juxtapose it with what the Auditor General highlights, in fact, maybe just before the colleagues come in, the Auditor General projects that as of this financial year, 2024-2025, we are likely to get to 110 point something trillion of the debt. And so that means that it is increasingly going high. I know that there are hopes of getting a bit of oil resources here and there, which again is another whole broad discussion. But as we stand today, it's in a place where we have to interrogate ourselves, because it greatly affects how service delivery is executed, but also how the citizens, who again at the end of the day are the biggest beneficiary or victims in this case. Each of the Uganda, if you are to equate the total budget and give each of us at least a figure, we stand at around 2.6 million, both young and professor here. And this professor is, I thought maybe the older should be a bit higher, 5 million, and then the younger ones maybe 600. But all of us at 2.6. Yeah.
Professor, let me get you in. This phenomenon of public debt, is it really a question of financial prudence or management by the government, in a sense that if you borrow, then you maybe seriously manage those funds? Or is it a consideration that let me not borrow as much and I try to utilize what I have, in other words, live within our means? How do we navigate the complex discussion surrounding the public debt in the country?
Thank you. I don't think we can navigate unless we rethink our way of doing things in Uganda and Africa generally. I think part of the problem of Africa is operating without principles to give a wider direction. What principle is driving your management of public affairs? Secondly, organization. We lack organizational capacity and direction. We are here talking about public debt, but we have not even defined it. Let me give an example. There are presidential pledges. Isn't that a public debt?
No.
In your definition?
No, it's not public.
I thought the public debt is what the government owes the people.
No.
No.
It's
It is what?
The loan, the government borrows
Yes.
to fund its budget.
What is the debt?
It is what you owe.
Doesn't the government owe the population that money which is promised? If, for example, the Uganda Human Rights Commission hears your case that you are tortured and awards you money, is the government of Uganda owing you that money?
No, I mean, so
So we are
in
going
that
into
sense.
technicalities of debts, but I'm giving you a broader picture of what the government owes the population and the debtors and how it should be paid. Because we are not getting a proper definition even of debt. I know the argument that is going to come to define and legal or whatever, but the government is burdened by heavy debts because ultimately there will be the public coffers will be raided. They will go to the public coffers to pay that which the government owes to whether an individual or whatever. So we have a problem of organization in terms of managing our public affairs generally, and in this case, the management of the debt. And we don't have even a principle that guides direction, and we have not also given it participatory, clear scrutiny. Even when you are borrowing, let's use your official debt now of the other one of borrowing, that the debt is borrowing. You can have a debt without borrowing. If you beat somebody and you owe him something for assaulting him.
Like how the debt, Uganda has a debt for about the things they stole in Congo. It's a debt they have to pay. Is it counted in the other debt? Maybe it is counted. But anyway, it's not.
The issue is when you are borrowing, you must also see whether you are borrowing for the common good, as my neighbor here pointed out. Sometimes we just borrow to spend on luxuries. It is possible. Sometimes we borrow without being ready, as he pointed out, that you borrow and the government is supposed to contribute a certain percentage for that project that you have borrowed for, but you borrow when you don't have your percentage to add on, and then it delays, and yet you are paying interest on that loan you have acquired. And that's how it ends up accumulating. This is lack of, I think, organization and planning. And we just simply say, let's go and borrow. But even the consequences of borrowing. I have heard sometimes even government saying that, you see, the external, relying on external sources of borrowing is now reduced to this percentage. But they don't tell you that the domestic borrowing has increased. And in my opinion, I would rather have higher external debt than the domestic debt. Because the domestic debt implies that, because they get it from these treasury bonds and whatever, from the banks are the ones which lend government. And that denies the private sector access to cheap credit from these banks. So you find that the private sector is competing with government over borrowing that money. Remember, domestic borrowing, you don't even cancel it. Maybe external, we can hope against hope in our private thinking that at some point they will just cancel it because they have done it in the past. The domestic one you will pay. The domestic debt you will have to pay anyway, whether you like it or not.
And with a higher interest.
With higher interest. These days we have even said, since this Western world are disturbing us, let's go to China. China's debts are very expensive in terms of interest rates and payment, and they don't have this grace period. As soon as you borrow, they start counting. Whereas these other institutions like World Bank, they can say, after 30 years, we shall start counting the interest or payment. So we have to think through this borrowing and make sure that when we borrow, we are effective. Can we look at effectiveness and efficiency of utilizing roads? Because we don't give it a thought. We just think about, we need a road here, we need the other one there, we need this one here. Sometimes the justification for that road is political support, not necessarily logic that it is targeting a certain economic activity that will boost the economy. Like you say, there is a mineral here, and we have to get this mineral so that it adds on our whatever. And then let me add in another spanner. Uganda's economy today, as we talk, is not doing badly from the statistics we get. We are one of the countries in this region that are doing very well. How come that we are overcrying? The question is also of revenue. Our capacity to collect revenue efficiently and effectively so that we can avoid this continuous borrowing. The biggest export earner for Uganda today is gold. I think it has gone to a trillion. Yeah?
Slightly surpassed it.
Next to coffee.
1.1.
No, it has surpassed coffee.
Yeah. Yes, it did.
But
Years ago.
I want to ask whoever is listening, whoever is here, how much are we earning as tax revenue from gold? It is almost to zero. This is where we get it wrong. I don't know whether the members here and out there know that Uganda Revenue Authority, not as an institution per se, but Uganda Revenue Authority is the worst performer in East Africa. Here, the East Africa I'm talking about is Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. They are basket cases like Burundi and Sudan, the states are in disarray here and there. But those four I've talked about, Uganda Revenue Authority is the worst performer.
In terms of efficiency,
in terms of tax collection to GDP. Can I repeat it?
Yeah, compared to Kenya Revenue.
Compared to Kenya Revenue Authority and Tanzania Revenue Authority and Rwanda Revenue Authority, Uganda Revenue Authority collects the least in terms of ratio to GDP. That means we are inefficient. Either the Uganda Revenue Authority is inefficient or the Ministry of Finance, which determines fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is now how you get revenue and also how you spend it. Utilize it. The Ministry of Finance itself, when it is coming up with policies of tax collection and expenditure, has issues.
But Prof, on that point, a critic would argue that on the flip side, perhaps that's a direct indication of the morbid state of our economy, that the taxman is not able to collect enough.
No.
But even
why you ask the question, why is he not able to collect according to, in relation to GDP? Partly it might be their fault, because of inefficiency or corruption.
We have a narrow tax base.
But also the fiscal policy of government. For example, there are many people exempted. And big companies are exempted from paying tax. That's one. Now, I can say something that sounds unpopular. You see, Uganda's policy is not to tax agriculture. To me, taxing a peasant with 10 cows, local cows, or taxing somebody who sells 20 matoke per month, that is very unfair. It shouldn't be done. But how on earth can you allow somebody who sells 2 lorries of matoke every month? Somebody who has got, there are people who are boasting of having 10,000 cows, that you don't tax them. And then you go for a civil servant or any other employed person who earns, today the threshold for collecting taxes is what? 300,000 or 400,000? Somebody is earning 400,000, you are taxing that person, but somebody is selling milk and getting 10 million and is not taxed. I mean, these are challenges. You go to town here and you find somebody has constructed a building, or even simultaneously he's constructing about 3 buildings. You go to Chanja. I don't know how many of you have gone to Chanja already. Along the road there, the town, spouting high rises. How much do those people constructing those buildings, how much are they paying to Uganda Revenue Authority? So we have a challenge. Yes, we have a challenge of mismanaging public affairs, and we are here crying, getting more and more debts and loans, when actually we could somehow finance. That is a contradiction I'm talking about. Uganda's economy is rising. GDP is rising. We are going to middle income. But then tax collection, we are going down. We are collecting less and incurring more debts. Why is there that contradiction? The contradiction must be arising out of our poor organization of finances and society, inefficiency, and being ineffective. But ultimately, again, there is a question of where are we spending this money? How do we distribute this money? I don't think the government of Uganda today is informed by the challenge, the existential threat of inequality. We should be borrowing that money to address the inequality. As long as we are building two Ugandas, the Uganda of the super rich and the Uganda of the super poor, Uganda will never be a nation state. As he has pointed out to me, I am more concerned about building a nation state, a cohesive nation state. As long as the levels of inequality are going high and we are not borrowing money and planning and budgeting to narrow this gap between the rich and the poor, and we just go laughing around that, oh, Uganda's economy is growing when other people's poverty are also growing. When you can't have, if you have an economy growing very fast, but also equally at the same time simultaneously inequality is growing.
It's a danger.
From my analysis of social development, expect war next time.
Yeah, so
there is no way you will have two Ugandas in one nation. We shall have war.
You want to say something in a minute?
yeah, so I've just in light of what Prof highlighted, and this is not to really deny the rest of the panelists to say something. So I've just texted a friend, a colleague of mine at URA, and just to double check what Prof says. So in terms of the targets that each country has in terms of collection, again, that is dependent on each country's economy's situation.
Targets.
Yeah, so each, yeah, absolutely. So last year, I know, absolutely. Last year, where we had the projected budget of 52.7, our projection of mobilizing resources locally was that we would fund the budget up to 29 trillion. But URA fell short of 1 trillion of that and collected up to 28 trillion. Now, he's telling you that actually Uganda is a third of within the region after Kenya and Tanzania, which largely, of course, they have a bigger economies. Yeah, so he's telling me that it's true that Uganda is not necessarily the last, but in terms of collection, it stands the third of the three countries.
No, I disagree.
Yeah, but
I don't think you asked. Wait a minute. You asked the wrong question. I did not say the amount of tax collected by Uganda Revenue Authority or Kenya Revenue Authority. I'm talking about the ratio to GDP. Tell me that Uganda's collection of tax, Uganda Revenue Authority, tax to GDP is better than Rwanda. What is the percentage of Uganda? Uganda's collection is between 13 and 14%. In most cases, 13% of ratio to GDP. Compare it with Rwanda. You ask him.
Okay.
Winfred, in the meantime,
I follow these things. That's what we did with my NGO of Siatini. You ask them.
Let me engage Winfred on the key question of equality that Professor has highlighted in his submission. Equality or the lack of it, because the government seems to now have some sort of pinpointed focus on infrastructure development in terms of borrowing. But the question I want to put to you is, wouldn't it rather focus on issues that alleviate the collective suffering of the Ugandan citizen? For example, maybe invest in health sectors like education, as opposed to simply saying we are, as Professor here pointed out, we focus on political expeditions. Let us build a road that leads to nowhere, that does not boost the economy in any way, but simply because I am targeting at political support in the next electoral cycle. Therefore, I do not apply the logic that pertains to the exact need of the population, but I rather look at the political aim. What have you got to say about that? are the priorities of the government right in terms of the borrowing?
I'll start with this. Uganda is like, not Uganda. Our government, our state actors, our president, in fact our president, because he's the one on the lead. He's like, you know, when I've met very many people who have shared their stories, and there are some things they share which are not in where I come from. I'm like, okay, there are some areas where you see it's always been boys over girls, yes, men over women. And I heard of some culture, some family where even by the time this girl is still young and in school, he's already a bride to someone, and even they have started paying. I've had it in some cultures. And when someone mentioned about, it was Timothy when he was submitting and mentioned around fuel, around petrol, the president is petrol, the oil, I mean oil, sorry, thank you. They always, there's a way they front that thing when they're budgeting our oil. And to me in my head, it always rushes, Uganda, these people are like now, these people who are selling off the girl child at an early stage, even when the girl child wasn't yet ready, but the parents have already started collecting. Collecting dowry, enjoying the dowry. So whenever the president says my oil, whenever the ministers come and say that we have our oil, and then they are busy recklessly borrowing, I feel for them. They were like they already started enjoying the dowry for this young girl. By the time oil comes out,
they will utilize it to offset the debts that they have incurred. So
whenever I hear them talk about our oil, and then the discussion around the borrowing, when people are asking questions, you know, Uganda is already rich, we have gold, there is, like, you know, I feel...
Actually, Ghana did it and it is now in the crisis. They borrowed in advance.
Yes,
because
that is what I'm trying to. That is what I was trying to bring out. That for me, the picture I'm seeing, before I get to exactly what you're asking, the picture I'm seeing, the state and the leaders are doing, they are borrowing because they know that we have the oil. Yes, I said in my first submission, if I'm to rate the spirit of their spirit for the people, it would be below 2. And the other thing, just remind me about the question.
The priorities. Is the government correct on the priorities?
When you asked about the infrastructures, I remember even a discussion. I've forgotten. Some lady from the bank who was speaking at the gathering by the Ministry of it was Ministry of Finance, and during that discussion they all shared, and everyone was giving their view. Was like, yes, Uganda is doing good by investing in infrastructures, and for them they are coming off saying that, okay, these infrastructures will fasten and easen transportation of commodities, communication, when they build services, hospitals, and what services will be improved. So for them, they are looking at in the long run when this is improved. So if for you die early, when the things are not improved, they are not caring about you now. So for them right now, that is what I'm saying. Our leaders are thinking, are operating in the future. To me, they believe that even if by the time this road is ready for people to benefit, I don't care whether the person has died of hunger. I don't care whether the person has died of their high rates of death of pregnant mothers. I don't care whether there is malnutrition and people and children have died. No, right now let me focus on this, so that in future those ones who will be found alive will enjoy, which is wrong. You can't care for only the infrastructures and you're not caring for the people. Yes, because it is the people who elected you. Yes, you're also a person. By caring for another person, you're caring for yourself. Yes, and given even another thing to add on what Professor has been saying. For me, what I got Professor saying is, even if when we don't go into those ratios, let's be realistic. There is gold in Uganda. You can't say that someone with a small shop is paying and another one is not paying. That is where, yeah, that is where the problem is. That you can't say that investors, some investors are not paying, and a layman, a person on the
so-called phenomenon of tax holidays.
Yeah, and other people, you know, because it is okay. By the way,
in mind,
it is very okay to have tax holidays, but again, we need. What is the process of how we need to know? Yes, and how many Ugandans and at what level are benefiting from that? Everything, every initiative that any other person, whether Ugandan or not Ugandan, is benefiting from, how many Ugandans are benefiting and of which class, and how many, before even benefiting, do we even know about it? Is the community sensitized so that we also get into that level where we can get those tax holidays? How many people are sensitized? By the way, there are very many initiatives where a certain class in Uganda is benefiting and the other class is not benefiting. Not because they don't have to benefit, but because the knowledge has not trickled down to the last person. There is a way knowledge, some things in Uganda end at a certain level because people want to benefit them and their families and their husband. We are still, let me go back to the infrastructure.
About that inequality. It's not only between class and class, the inequality between class. It is also spatial inequality. That in Acholi sub-region, multidimensional poverty is 68%. In some region, it is about 10 or 15 or 3%. That's spatial.
When we go to when we go to region, by the way, we may times talk about things when we are relating to Kampala because that is where we are. We are relating to central region because where we are. But even when we go to the regions, you're talking about like northern region or western or everywhere.
Even Kampala between slums and these high rises.
That is what I'm saying, that even if it is in different region, there is a there is a town, there's a semi town, there are villages, there are those deep and deep and deep. So when I say that we are on the same page, so we are still talking about the infrastructures, and I want to give us, this is something Ugandans, we need to now just sit, and when you give your time to think, which I believe most people are not giving them, most people in the position of leadership, they are not giving themselves to critically think. Let me give an example on the infrastructures. I was here and thinking about Karuma Dam, which is closing. Is it closing on Monday? When people are going to stop using it?
It's the bridge.
Karuma Bridge. But still it's the bridge, Karuma Bridge on...
It's a critical highway. It's
a critical highway along the bridge. And I was seated, and it's an infrastructure. We are talking about infrastructure. And I want us to think...
We even talk about internet infrastructure.
And I want to know now we are talking about
more internet infrastructure.
And now I'm like, okay, government is investing more. They're telling us we are investing more in infrastructures, which is very, very good, and I credit them for that.
Does it include internet infrastructure?
We are going to get there. So you look at Karuma. When was it constructed, that bridge?
I think it's during
colonial period.
50s?
You know?
Should be in the 1950s.
But again, when the government came in, the bridge, I think it was first reconstructed. There's something that was done there in 2013. And then they're doing it right now. You get it? There's that time they were constructing it. So even the infrastructure, that is why citizens, we are getting concerned that, okay, government is putting money in these infrastructures. But again, these infrastructures, it takes a very short span of period, and the infrastructures have issues. Yes? Even the infrastructure, which means there is even a problem in either how are they even getting the people who are there, how are they contracting the people who are working on the different infrastructure that are even getting all the time spoiled. I can give also an example around the Kampala roads. It could be not even a full decade that most roads have been worked on, but now even when you walk around Kampala, every road has done what? Has potholes. Yes, we go to hospitals. They are saying we are investing in hospitals. We are getting this money to invest in services. Those services would be around hospitals. That is health. The services will be around. We've already talked about our schools. But again, even the schools.
Could a short comment on the infrastructure in terms of prioritizing inequality? You find here in Ntinda where we are, relatively the roads are good. But you, for a long time, you see the road going to Chirudu. How it looks like, where the majority of the patients pass the Sarama Road. Look at one time the one going to Murago there. So instead of prioritizing those ones where the ordinary majority people go, you prioritize Minister's Village in Tinda, you prioritize Muyenga, Kororo, Nakasero, and you leave out Sarama Road. That's where we are getting it wrong ideologically. And
not all animals are equal.
Yes, so are you an animal?
In Uganda, that is what they are following. Not all animals are equal.
So we can't go animalist.
To me, that is personally, I believe that is what what our president uses. Not all animals are equal. The ones in Kolo. Let me another thing you brought about roads. You were talking about roads, and I remembered you talked about Chirudu. Of recent, you would go around Nigeria, Chiwatule, to that hospital, Chira Hospital. The roads were really very bad, that even a patient could die along the way. So when the president was supposed to come there, and funny enough, he never came. 2 days to the day he was supposed to come.
There was
China, they brought Chinese to pour there and hide the holes. But the president never appeared. So that is our Uganda. So when they say we are developing infrastructures, we are borrowing to develop. For who? And how are you doing it? Yes. And is it really being done? And which kind of infrastructures are they talking about? You get it? They are giving us examples. But again, those examples are not speaking. The infrastructure, if you say infrastructure versus the debt, it's the two don't do what? Don't align. The other issue of borrowing, the last one, the other, as I conclude, the other issue of borrowing. Remember, they are borrowing to work on infrastructures, and again they borrow to refinance. You know, money that was spent on infrastructures. It poses a question. It is where us citizens are asking, yes, you're borrowing to work on the infrastructures, but we can't be borrowing year in, year out to work on infrastructures and borrow to refinance loans that are working on infrastructures that are not ending. And even people who are caught in cases around corruption for that same money are not held accountable. So it doesn't add up to tell us citizens that we are borrowing. We appreciate so far what they have done, but again, leaving the country that in the end, like I told you, for me right now, when I see Uganda, when I see where we are heading, the cabinet, the president and his cabinet, they are like the other parent I've told you in that village who is already taking her, trying to just help her daughter grow. But when the old daughter was already sold, we are going to come at a time when the country is already sold, when everything, even the infrastructures we are boasting about that we are borrowing, but when they're already for another country.
Apollo, let us now examine the entrenched and pervasive problem of corruption, which incidentally is also rearing its ugly head in the space of borrowing by the government. The president himself has pointed out that in Parliament he's aware of a syndicate which keeps on demanding for kickbacks, even in the process of facilitating these loan proposals and requests. So the question is, now that you have a somewhat good understanding of the operations of Parliament, what is it that can be done to address and check that? Because we have a problem whereby the government is not doing enough to align its priorities in view of the economic trajectory and outlook of the country. But we have even a bigger problem where, like Timothy pointed out, they are stealing over 10 trillion every financial year, and a substantial amount of that money is being lost in Parliament. at the stage of processing these loan requests? How do we get ourselves out of that mire?
Thank you, Isaac. But your question is very broad, because when you talk about the lobbying that happens in Parliament to have some loans approved, that forms a bigger part of corruption in this country. So it's so broad. It's corruption. It is not in any way different from the corruption that is elsewhere.
Maybe to break it down a bit, there is financial corruption and political corrun, but they feed into each other. Are we tackling political corruption?
Is it an intersection in terms of public debt?
They feed each other, all those, you know, political corruption and financial corruption, they feed into each other.
But let me raise this concern, because much of what we are talking about has been, most of the issues have been raised about the public debt. And indeed, the issue about the public debt has been a concern over time. But the Ministry of Finance and government always wants to paint that picture that the debt is still within the sustainable limits. And I think that is what explains what Timothy talked about, the contradictions between the report from the Auditor General and the report from the Ministry of Finance on what amounts the public debt, the current public
and my
debt.
concern that even that debt is not well defined. There is a debt which is not defined in that debt.
Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about is goes deep into the fiscal policy, because what you're asking about comes from, they rely on what the definition of the IMF and those
like
bigger
that.
international economic giants. That is the problem the professor is finding now. But my concern I want to raise is that even the issue of public debt has become political. It has become political in a way that they don't want to paint that picture of a country that is struggling or is even slipping into a debt crisis. It has become that political. But again, talking about corruption, we must also look at how this debt is accumulating, not forgetting that there is also corruption in acquiring these debts. You have heard of kickbacks, how people go to negotiate for these loans, but they expect kickbacks in this. I will give you an example of an issue that President Museveni has acknowledged. The loan that was acquired to fund the Bujagali Dam project. That is how we ended up having the most expensive dam per watt in the whole world. That is how we have ended up with the most expensive road in the whole world, which is the Entebbe Expressway. I'm now telling you that even as we speak about the public debt, there are other drivers of the rising public debt, which is actually the people who are benefiting from these loans. That is why there is even this motivation that that one should go to Parliament and lobby for MPs to pass a certain loan proposal in Parliament, because some people have interest, a hidden interest in those loans. The borrowing, like Timothy said, borrowing is not bad, but what are you borrowing for? Like I talked about the Bujagali, we were told that we are borrowing to build a dam such that we reduce on the tariffs, the power tariffs. That is what we were told. But what happened on commissioning Bujagali, it was found out that the tariff of Bujagali power was 5 times, actually 5 to 12 times, no, 5 to 8 times the tariff of Chirand and Arubale dams. Can you believe it? So,
in Uganda, you believe?
Yes, yes. So when they are presenting these loans, this is the sad part of it. When they are presenting the loan proposals, they sugarcoat. They tell you that this is going to benefit the people, and the loan is approved. Eventually, it is something different. It comes out that it is not benefiting, because even today as we speak, Bujagali power is much more expensive than any other hydro power dams. The energy from other power hydro dams that were here before it was even Karuma. Bujagali is still, the tariff is very high. So, like I said, the concern now should be on who is behind, or who is pushing for these loans. People are pushing loans because they know that an infrastructure project that they are now flaunting to be financed through this loan, they will have either
let me interject.
Wait a minute.
Let me interject. It's a critical question that you seem to raise, but it is suggestive of something else, because when you ask that who is pushing the loans, you seem to suggest that there is a disjointed approach in government in as far as the proposals are concerned, because my understanding is that the Minister of Finance is supposed to originate these proposals, having evaluated the correct need for them, and it should have the collective participation of the cabinet, and then the proposals are pushed to Parliament for consideration and subsequent approval. So is the problem that the government seems to be dismembered in as far as these requests are concerned?
Oh yes. They originate.
So there is another cabal in government which...
The loans, all these policy proposals originate from, for instance, the NRM Secretariat, then they go to Cabinet, then they are brought to Parliament for approval. The presumption is that Parliament is now the approval from the people because they are representatives of the people. But if I may ask you and the panelists here, does Parliament still represent the interests of the people? Does this Parliament still represent or stand with the interests of the people? No. So,
have they ever, this one?
What Professor Ndebesa talked about, participation, is lacking. Parliament, at times, either it is arm-twisted to pass these loan proposals, or it is induced,
so that they get the anjaur,
or it is induced to, or it is ignored. Some loans are pushed straight through Parliament, and they find their way. So I now pity with the local people, because one, we will have the burden to pay back the loans. We have that burden. But again, even the infrastructure we are talking about that is financed by these loans
is poor.
You have a road like the Northern Bypass, constructed in 2008, I remember, before Chogam. It was commissioned during the Chogam, before it was completed actually. But again, after 7 or 6 years, it has developed cracks.
Somebody ate some inches.
You know what I'm saying?
Or centimeters of the tarmac.
It would be okay. Let me tell you, Isaac and colleagues, it would be okay if a loan was procured. And let me tell you what I've not talked about. Even these loans are procured at high interest rates, at very high interest rates. That is why my Honorable talked about borrowing.
I take it.
Borrowing to service the loan.
You're honorable when you are on way.
You get what I'm saying? So it would be better, it would be okay if we procure a loan at an expensive loan, but we have it put to an effective use, and we have, for instance, a road that will last for 40 years. Don't you think that would be better? But what do we have? We suffer the burden twice, we repay, but even what we are paying for is not there. That is the problem. I again agree with Professor.
As you consider your closing remarks, yes.
Yeah, I conclude. We should start we should start looking at how we grow. We widen the tax base instead of focusing on what? On borrowing to fund our what? Our budget. As we stand, Timothy will remind me, we have on the URI Rwanda not more than 4 million taxpayers.
Those who pay directly. Otherwise, all Ugandans will pay.
Yeah, we pay indirectly. But we have less than 40,000. No, 4 million, sorry. 4 million taxpayers.
In other words, our tax is regressive. Our tax system is regressive.
Yes.
It is taxing.
Those who are paying
a minority.
Yeah.
It might be taxing very many, but they are taxing consumption, not taxing income. Therefore, the tax falls on the poor, not the rich.
Those who
That's a progressive taxes income, not consumption.
The few that are paying heavily. Then the majority who are paying indirectly, what Professor is talking about, they are poor, but they are also
because they consume the general merchandise they pay.
Yes. So I think it goes back to the fiscal policy, like he talked about. We have to rethink how we can fund our budget, the sources, and again look at the priorities where we spend our money.
Thank you, Apollo, for your perspective. Winfred, your closing remarks on the program.
Thank you so much, viewers. Thank you for your time you've spent with us, and thank you for listening in. Again, I thank our civic space. I love the president's slogan during the election. Is it secure your future? Is it the one?
Securing your future. Yes.
Securing your future. So it's going to be my it's going to be my lead. It's going to be the lead of the closing remarks to all Ugandans, as the president urged us to secure our future. But as we secure our future, we need to look at, because we can't secure our future in an environment where there is no peace and security.
And equality.
And of course, when we don't have peace and security, it means there is no equality, and equity is also compromised. So as much as we look at things like capitation of funds to our children, which is very crucial to the education of our children, we need to make sure that they access equal equal. There is equal access to the education and quality education, not just any education. And everyone has to speak out that there is equality and equality and quality in the education our children are receiving, not anything that the government is putting there for our children. And also around infrastructures, we all know it's been always every day said that debts are rising every year. It goes high. We can't say that we are building infrastructures. The infrastructures are getting better, yet at the end we are going to compromise. We'll have infrastructures which are compromised because the country, we can't pay, because we are the people. It's us paying the taxes that have to pay for the debts. So we can't be in a situation where at the end we are being compromised. So our dear President, as we go with your slogan, securing our future, help us secure the future very well by looking into the things that are putting us behind. Thank you so much, and the host. To everyone, happy to be with you here on this panel. I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Winfred, for sharing your thoughts with us on the program. Professor, your closing remarks.
My closing remarks will be around some 3 issues. Let me hope I will continue remembering them because of time. One, I liked the slogan that populated the airspace and public space in Tanzania. Last time they were in elections, before the late Magufuli died, anyway. They were talking about development of things versus development of people. Are we developing things or are we developing people? Yes, we can develop both, but the priority should be, in my opinion, the development of people should take priority in our budgeting, even in our borrowing. Development of people, not necessarily development of things. That's one. Two, We need to shift our attention and mindsets and ideology away from the Adam Smith things of the wealth of nations. When we are calculating the wealth, we should run away, not run away, but we should not prioritize the wealth of nations as GDP. We should go to the development of the people and use human development indices to determine whether we are developing or not. Not necessarily the wealth of nations, but the wealth of people. And finally, I want to call upon our policymakers and the lawmakers, whatever, and these days they say they are the ones who are patriotic, but I don't know whether any of those patriots has a child in a UPE school. Yeah? A patriot who has no child in UPE school. Those are our patriots. Patriots who do not go to Wino to shop from there, but they shop even from London. We have patriots who don't have their patients go to Chirudu and Baisi, Kawempe, who go to Aga Khan, Nairobi, South Africa, in Europe. Those are our patriots. Those are our patriots who are making policies, who are making laws, who are allocating resources, who are determining our loans. They need to have a paradigm shift. Think about the ways of people, not necessarily of nations. Think about development of people, not necessarily of things. If we don't change and reduce this inequality gap that is widening between class and class, between the urban and the rural, between regions and regions, then we are not building a cohesive state. And if we don't build a cohesive state, and those patriots who don't have their children in UPE schools, they need to know that once you build two nations in one, and you celebrate today, tomorrow either you or your children will not celebrate when the country disintegrates. So we need to think about harmonious, cohesive nation and society by reducing inequality and budgeting for the people, not necessarily for the things.
Thank you, Professor.
But I wish our colleague could give us a statistics about revenue authorities in the region.
Yeah. Sharing your
GDP ratio.
Thank you, Professor, for your valuable insights. Let me now come to Timothy.
Again, just small time, like Professor said, they should develop the people. I'm an eco-feminist. As they develop the people, they must look at the planet. We can't develop only the people when we are not looking at the environment. We have to develop the people and the planet because the people stay on the planet. So two go in hand. So let them not only focus on the people.
In other words, you are saying the existential threat in the world is two: inequality and environmental destruction.
Yeah.
Yes, Timothy. Do you wish to respond to Professor before you make your closing remarks?
I think that my response is largely going to trigger a response from him. But nonetheless, let me just say a couple of things. I know, but nonetheless, since it's been Prof as I highlighted it, the tax to GDP ratio, at least to the statistics that I have here as shared with me, Kenya stands between 16 to 18%. Tanzania stands between 8 to 10%. Uganda 10 to 12%. Rwanda 12 to 13%. Burundi 25 to 30%. Now, in terms of hierarchy, actually you see that Kenya is performing faster and it's higher. The statistics according to here, you'll see that Burundi, actually the tax to GDP is around 25 to 30%. How factual that is, I think it's something it's not factual. So, and Tanzania, Rwanda, which Prof was highlighting, stands between 12–13% of the tax to GDP ratio. And so I think that looking at it from the perspective of the Ugandan taxman, the URA, I think that there are gaps, there are definite gaps. There are issues in terms of equality, as highlighted by colleagues, in terms of the ability to broaden the tax base, to ensure that we have a bigger tax base so that we have more people, you know, paying the tax, but also more importantly, ensuring that we work progressively to ensure that we can domestically finance our budget because it's more sustainable. It gives us more leverage in terms of being able to determine what we want, but also providing the different strategies that the country wants. And for me, again, really, in terms of my concluding remarks, today we've covered two major items: the education and the question of the debt, debt and its sustainability. There are quite a number of challenges that we've highlighted in there. The bottom line for those two, you see that there's a bigger problem in terms of management, in terms of governance. And that if we do not address the question of governance, this will be a recurring issue in terms of how the problem that we are highlighting. And so, as Winnie highlights, I think the question of being able to secure a future is in the hands of Ugandans. And this is not in the leaders. In fact, the evidence and what we are seeing today is that leaders don't mind. They don't care, as Prof is highlighting, that for them, actually, healthcare is not that they would consume locally. They would want, again, because of the resources. Education, they don't consume what Ugandans consume. So you can't guarantee the security or securing the future of this country according to the leaders that we have. In fact, they have proven not to mind Ugandans or even have the Ugandans at heart. And so Ugandans must step up and secure their own future. And that means being able to participate in our country's ongoing issues. Participate in the elections, participate in the governance, hold the leaders accountable, and broadly speaking, understand what's going on really. Ultimately, it lies on the hands of Ugandans. There is no guarantee in the current leadership, and even those that are likely to come in the immediate short term, given our landscape, the political landscape, but also the legal landscape within the country. You can't guarantee it on the leaders. They have proven to really not to stand according to what would expect to them. And so for me, really is a clarion call to each and every one of us, to our viewers, to say that let's take up responsibility, let's participate in the country's governance. Elections are coming soon. We must ensure that we are participating in determining who our leaders are. And those that are there, we must hold them accountable in whichever way. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy,
Isaac,
for sharing your perspective with us. Oh, sure. I asked you first, but yes, if you must say.
Yeah, quickly. As Timothy waits to see whether people can participate in governance, in shaping the governance of this country. May I call upon the patriots in this country to demand for a shift in policy. What Professor Ndebesa talked about. Why would we have people who have schools, yet they are policy makers, who own private schools, who are policy makers, who are in charge of policy? Why can't we revise that policy and say we want our all, why would you cook food that you cannot eat? If you have a school and you are in government, let us see your, let's have government officials take their schools to
their children to public to UPE schools
as a mandatory
because
government
they are the ones who designed this policy and who actually promote this policy. Let them have their children
so that we see that they are patriots.
Let's also have a policy, a strict policy, that government officials should go to government hospitals if they really seek health care. They only go to what? Let's have a policy that all government officials, when they are flying out of this country, fly Uganda Airlines. You know what I'm saying? We pretend that we are patriotic, we love our country, but in practice we do something else. So I think before we even call for these bigger changes, let's demand for these small things. Let's not allow people who are policy makers in the education sector also own schools. Let them leave it to others who can do it. You are a policymaker, but again you are a beneficiary in the same sector. It is really, it can't work.
Thank you, Prof, for sharing your views with us on the program. Once again, I must appreciate you, Timothy, Professor, Winfred, and Apollo, for your able participation on the program, but also for your valuable patriotic guidance to the populace out there. To our esteemed viewers, we appreciate you for your time and for watching. Many thanks to the production team for keeping us live on air. Please, our viewers, engage us on various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Instagram, we are on YouTube, where you can watch and also subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.